for being with us. I know that it's the end of the day, that it's hot, etc., etc. But talking about tourism in Aix it's the right place to be to talk about this theme. It's a current theme, tourism and the adapting planet. So before we start, let me just introduce you the two participants. But let me give you some figures first to illustrate the theme. Tourism, it's 7% of GDP in France, 250 billion in terms of turnover, but 250 billion jobs across the world. That's the positive side of things. But then we can look at things differently. In France, it's 7% of the GDP and between 10 and 14% of greenhouse gas emissions. So there are other problems. And everywhere in the world, it uses resources, water. A tourist consumes twice as much water as a local. Pollution is another problem in the Caribbean, on cruises. 73,000 cruise ships exist. 3.5 kilos of waste a day against 0.8 kilos for a local. And habitats are being destroyed because of tourism. So there are lots of problems with tourism. COVID kind of halted tourism for a while, but today the figures are even higher than they were before COVID. So how is the planet going to adapt? Well, maybe it's up to tourism to adapt. And I've got two people with me who are experts on the subject. Pascal Savary, who's the president of Atream. It's a management company specialized in funds. It has 4 billion WIP. It works with Center Parcs, Pierre et Vacances, Mama Shelter, and it has investments in Club Med. Then we have Jean-Pierre Nadir, who founded and directed Ici Voyage. He sold it. And now he has Fair Move for ethical travel. Yes, ethical travel. And the mission, the assignment, is to develop responsible tourism by reconciling the interests of the planet and the interests of tourists. My name is Christophe Agnus. I'm president of an association called Reporters of Hope. Now, of course, with a theme like hope, it's important to be here. I'm going to ask Pascal Savary something to start. Center Parcs have lots of swimming pools that are heated. How do you adapt with this kind of problem? How can we lower impacts when you are at Center Parcs? Let me just add to what you've said first and give you some figures, some more positive figures about this tourist industry. So you were citing 7%. I think it's 10% of GDP in France and 10% of GDP in Europe. What I'm going to talk to you about is tourism in Europe. We are the first world market in Europe with 50% market share. In other words, out of 1.5 billion tourists in the world, 750 million are in Europe. We're in France and the first destination with 90 million foreign tourists. And I differentiate excursionists. We have 200 million a year in France, those who go through France without stopping. Foreign tourists are those who spend at least one night in France. So we have 90 million. So 80% of them are European. The others emit a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So 7 billion in terms of GDPs. Oh, sorry, 57 billion, and we emit 48 billion abroad. In other words, that's 14 billion more a year. So we're not good. We're not good in this field. So if we were good, it wouldn't be 14 billion surplus. It would be 30 billion surplus in France. And how can we adapt things? Yes, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. He's impatient, but I want to give you some ingredients that are important. We're talking about 2.5 billion jobs in France. And let me give you an example. You said that we were the shareholders of Pierre et Vacances and Center Parcs. The last Center Parcs that we opened in Langue de Gascogne near Marmande, well, it took us 10 years to open it, first of all. We created 450 direct jobs, 150 indirect jobs. 70% of those jobs were people who were on minimum wages before. And when we talk about integration, When we talk about training, and I will cite my friend Gérard Périsson, who left us a few months ago, he said it's not about social development in small steps, it's about taking big steps for helping people to socially develop. So this is important because France, and I'll come back to your question very quickly, we really need to focus on training when it comes to services. We've always confused services and being a server. When you buy a cottage or you're in a hotel room, when you're in the hospitality business, you buy a service, and that's very important. 90 billion tourists come to France. We're media above all. People come and see us, and they want to see the spirit of France when they come and see us. So we need to be hospitable. We need to offer them a real service and a customer satisfaction. So yes, we're adapting. Obviously, we're adapting. Just give me 30 seconds more. Let me go back to Center Parcs. That's our ambition for Center Parcs. We've got 29 Center Parcs in Europe, from Denmark to France. And of course, you've got the Aquamundo, the big swimming pool that we have. And as I was explaining at lunchtime, it's heated to 29 degrees. We've brought it down to 27. And our relationship with customers was more difficult. So obviously we need education, we need to explain why we do things. We have to work on water recycling, that's important too. This means that we need to reinvest in all of the technical systems between now and 2030. We need to invest an awful lot of money, and that's a huge challenge. And all tour operators, the whole of the tourist industry, in the next 5-6 years, it's going to have to work on a transformation policy, an environmental policy, and a social policy, but there are major challenges for this. Jean-Pierre Nadir, there's a sentence that I'd like to cite. The idea that tourism is the solution rather than the problem. Can you explain that? Well, first of all, let me congratulate everybody who's here. They've stayed. It's almost about 15 of us, so it's like being a part of the same family. So today, if we look back, and of course I agree what Pascal said in many ways, today tourism is a sector that's very much decried. It's a sector that for many years was about listening, sharing, brought together good people, made peoples come together, and now we've got shitty people who are polluting the planet, or at least that's the reputation. So the sector is finding it difficult to find the right kind of solutions. So I've thought about this fundamental question. Should we stop tourism in order to save humanity? Because if it was just about stopping tourism, you know, some people say that if we stop aeroplanes, we would save the planet. Well, if that was the case, then let's do it. You know, it's like saying stop smoking and then you don't die of cancer. But unfortunately, there's no easy solution. There's no simple solution. So it's a heresy to say that we just need to stop people using airplanes. Today, we've managed to make people believe that airplanes are objects of pleasure for rich people who go and have a fun time abroad, and with their money, they pollute all of these poor populations who have no choice, who don't have any solutions. In fact, airplanes, it's about freight, medications being transported, tooling machines being transported, industrial systems being transported. It's about business, people who move around. Of course, 50%, there are 50% more people who don't travel. And then we're talking about people who go home. So it's 1/3 of the air traffic. These are people who come from somewhere and they're going back home. So multiculturalism is a piece of luck for the world. It's important to be able to circulate. So there's the fourth dimension, which is the tourist side of things. We've got to understand that aeroplanes are a necessity. It's 2.8% of the problem in terms of carbon emissions. We know this. So it's less than digital technologies, and we have to find solutions, obviously. But what I'm interested in is not to have this message explain that hydrogen will be the solution, that we're going to have hybrid airplanes or electric planes. Yes, in 2030, there will be electric planes that will be able to cover 1,000 kilometers. In 2050, you will have hydrogen airplanes, and maybe we will have developed more biofuels then. But how do we go about things for 2030? That's the question. There's the IPCC report. We want minus 50% by 2030. So how do we adapt? Well, the first thing is we can be more sober. We explain to people, instead of taking 2 flights a year for their holidays, just take 1 flight and stay for 2 weeks rather than 1 week. It means more distribution locally. So it's quite easy. It's something that would work arithmetically. We can get rid of flights that are not good, like low-cost flights, Limoges, Edinburgh, financed by the region at 29 euros. What's the point of that? It's just stupid. So it's 3 million euros given to Ryanair to operate the flight, but it's just about polluting. That's because nobody in Limoges wanted to go to Edinburgh. And nobody from Edinburgh wanted to go to Limoges. And when Gérard goes home and says to Martine, maybe we could go and do, what do you call it? In Scotland, there's a thing. And then she will say, why do it? Well, it's only cost 29 euros. So the idea that we can be sober is obvious. So, of course, we can get rid of flights without losing out on pleasure. There are some things that add no benefits. That's the first thing to act on. We can also prioritize direct flights. 15% less in terms of the carbon footprint. When we focus on a direct flight rather than other flights, then it means less takeoff, less landing, etc. So it's a fairly simple solution. Secondly, we need to have airlines with co-pilots who adjust powers. You know, sometimes you come from destinations and, you know, you've got the wind behind you, and that means that you've won an hour. In that case, the airline needs to adjust the power of the plane and use less fuel. We could also drop the weight by refueling differently rather than have the whole carbon footprint of all of the fuel being carried. We can focus on airlines that have new generation planes that consume 20% less fuels than previous airplanes. So when we talk about the airline sector, this means, you know, the aviation sector has become very diverse. It's like cholesterol. There is the good part of the sector and the bad part of the sector. So this means that responsible tourism starts with responsible tourists who have the right information and who can say, who can't say, I didn't know. They've got the right information, so they can take the right decisions and in full awareness. So if you don't give people the responsibility, then they don't do these things. Collectively, we can take the right decisions if we know what the right measures are. So as there are not many people in the room, you need to clap twice as loudly. So right decisions. We can imagine holidaying differently, no, Pascal? Develop means or proposals, holiday proposals that have a lower impact. Yes? Yes. Well, just to add to what's been said, he's talking about traveling, but you know, you have to land somewhere, you have to visit places. Well, what's important for us, I said this earlier on, we're going to have to invest massively in the 5 to 6 years ahead of us in infrastructures, in accommodation, and that's a major challenge. It's a major challenge in the months and years to come. Our customers, you, us, we want this. We're asking more and more questions about the circular economy, about work, phonic insulation, energy. All of those aspects are important. From the E from LG is something that we've talked about, and it's normal. We are first and foremost citizens, and we have to be responsible citizens. We all have to be responsible. And the market will regulate all of that one day. Let me just finish. I think it's important. S is important. I explained that 2.5 billion jobs were concerned. Integration, training, development of jobs, the notion of service and satisfaction for our customers. These are all essential points. For us, it's important, and here again, the impact in regions. I was citing Center Parcs earlier on. There's the regional bank that is taking over the Vitel legacy site. Yes, it's about focusing on regions, providing new destinations, and being in line with all of these criteria. It's about creating jobs, it's about creating an economic dynamic for regions in France, and that's very important. It's not always the same regions. There are regions that deserve to be invested in and supported. So these are very important subjects, either in France or in Europe, where we need, and there was a workshop this morning about saving, earmarking savings, local savings in the tourist industry. This is important. It's transparent, it's about responsibility, it's about being responsible. Collectively, this is important. It means that we can be proud of what we do. We were talking about 90 million French tourists and 50 billion. It's important to make 75, 95 billion with these same tourists. It creates wealth, and we can only invest in transformation, in energy transformation, if we have growth. Yes, of course, you need accommodation. I started with transport because it's important. But why is tourism the solution? It's the solution because since yesterday, everybody's been saying we have to save the planet to save our children. We can't leave them a horrible, shitty world. But in fact, today, there are 3 billion people who already have a shitty life. They live with less than $2 a day. There are lots of children who don't know whether they'll be able to eat in the evening. We're talking about the end of the month and the end of the world. But, it's the end of the day. So we need to, some people worry about finding wood to make a fire, enough food. Can we get them on board in a CSR approach? They don't care anything about that. We're hearing about cleaning beaches, but their vision is a 24-hour vision. Why would they pick up waste? So we don't realize that we're not part of the collective world approach. So you've got Facebook, etc., all of these social media in Africa. They have jacuzzis and great cars, and other people are tightening their belts. So it's not a peaceful world. And tourism has to be the variable where we can calm things down by creating jobs, because what was said is very true about jobs. But there are countries that whose GDP is, for whom tourism makes up 70% of their GDP. So yesterday we had the president of Senegal. 33% of the GDP in Senegal comes from Western Union. What is Western Union? We're talking about people who swam across to go and work in France, who then go on their bikes and work for Uber. So that's the world that we live in. In my world, I make eco-responsible hotels in Senegal. I develop tourism in Senegal. I train people in Senegal. I create win-win ecosystems locally. I don't take across things that serve no purpose. I localize production. I make sure that the prices are the prices that are the right prices for Senegalese. I get rid of beef because people don't eat beef in Mauritius. I give them a taste of elsewhere. And so I create a win-win model. And as Pascal said, tourism has a virtue. Any guy can get into tourism. If you have no diploma, you can start as a server and you can learn languages, and very quickly you will go up the ladder. This is often how chefs start. They start as commis chefs. They start at the bottom of the ladder, and that's what you can do in tourism. It offers jobs. 40% of jobs in agriculture have disappeared over the last 30 years. In manufacturing, machines are replacing men. The Chinese are doing all of the jobs. What projects do we have for Africa? What are we going to get them to do? How can we recreate human dignity? My project is a project for all of humanity. It's about tourism as a means of calming the world down, tourism as a solution. Now, when I hear this, and I have a conclusion, there's Odia who says, so there are left-wing politicians, but there are flying fish who are not representative of their kind. Are you representative of your kind? It's a lovely species, a lovely kind. I think what's important is, it's a bit like both of us, we express it differently. We've got to be really convinced about the worth of our industry. It's about respecting individuals. It's about being investors, and we're kind of atypical because we're also operators. We were talking about Pierre & Vacances and Center Parcs. We also support Accor and other brands like Club Med in Europe, exclusively in Europe. It's a major challenge, including for people who are in the margins of society. 70% of people recruited were on minimum wages. And we were talking about the opening of Center Parcs earlier on. And there was a young woman, about 40 or so, a single mother with 4 children, who saw that there were no savings, but she smiled again because she found a job and she rediscovered dignity. And I think that's what's important. I understand what you're saying with respect to African countries, developing countries. I also think that in our societies, we need to reintegrate a certain number of people who are motivated. Well, that's certainly what we want to do. That's what we strive to do. We want to create jobs, we train the people that we recruit, and we're lucky. We're lucky we have people who have top qualities and who they can be integrated as part of a supply, part of a major industry. We listened to the figures earlier on. They're essential for our economy. And one last point, the growth of tourism in France and in Europe is bigger than the growth of our country. That means that it's an industry, it's a driving force for France. Jean-Pierre, can you conclude? I thought that the young lady in front of me was smiling at me, but she's just telling me that we've only got 5 minutes left. So you're talking about left-wing, right-wing. I think it's not really a question of left-wing, right-wing. The question is giving people the means of developing, having a genuine ability, thanks to courage and humility. What about, does the rest of industry think like you? Yes, I think they all think like me. When you're in the travel industry, when you're in tourism, there's empathy. Traveling, it's what? It's going to see other people. There's a great sentence that says that what is a foreigner? A foreigner is a friend that we haven't met yet. Well, traveling, that's about going out to meet others, seeing how they live. It's about being impregnated with other models. Travel, it's about learning. And when you come back from a trip, you're more intelligent than when you left. And that's important. What does it mean? It means that traveling can play an educational role. We were talking about water. So we're beginning to set water quotas per room. And if you go beyond your quota, you pay a supplement. But it's to show people that water has a value. So when there are no oranges in the country, there's no orange juice, for example. 10 years ago, no orange juice in the morning meant that the management was sequestrated and taken hostage. So people complain. So new tourism, it's tourism. It's not about being a predator. It's about doing things for the benefits of everybody.